Here's how to build trust in your team to boost productivity. I shared the exact method I use to coach executives and leaders that will build trust in your team. Number one is integrity. Now, when I think about integrity, I think about two things. Number one, transparency. Number two, accountability. Transparency is about being open about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you expect them to get it done. Sometimes leaders leave this step undone and leaves more questions than answers. And over time, if this becomes a habit, it's a way that can start to corrode trust within your team because they're not knowing what you're expecting. And more importantly, they don't know why they're doing what they're doing. This is such a really easy way that you can just start to build trust foundationally within your team. And the second part of integrity is accountability. And this is holding people accountable to the degree in which they are capable. Now, we're not always going to hold a new grad or a recent grad to the same level of accountability and levels of work as we would potentially with somebody who's more seasoned on our team. But the goal is to hold everyone accountable to getting the mission completed, right? And so one thing is, this is probably something I've seen break trust in a lot of teams with their leaders by them not just simply holding people accountable. If you're going to get something done, let's get it done, right? And making sure that we get it done in the time in which we say. And the more that leaders become, I'd say loosey-goosey, if you will, about it, they start to lose trust within the team. And I see this commonly, especially when you have high performers who start to see leaders not holding others accountable. And typically what happens is those high performers usually are the ones who are picking up the slack and they lose trust. Now, let's talk about number two. It's harmony. What is harmony? Harmony is psychological safety and empathy. And so psychological safety really comes around from, do I feel safe on the team? Now, I know that this word has lots of connotations, but when I think about psychological safety, I want my team to be able to come to me when they're doing good and when they're doing bad. And that's built on trust, right? That comes back to, if I share this, right, will my leader be transparent? Will they hold me accountable? Will they hold the team accountable to how I'm getting things done? So this is really key piece of trust. It's this psychological safety, your team being able to be open and being honest with you. And then the other coin of psychological safety is empathy. Now, once I've shared this with you, right, and I feel safe enough to share, how do you respond in that moment? And there's a tricky part about harmony and building harmony with your team. It's not just about you showing empathy towards them, but it's them showing empathy towards each other that creates this really amazing synergy between you and the team and them getting it done. When there's lack of harmony in the team, usually there's something brewing. And if you're not careful, it can turn really toxic really quick. So I would encourage you to make sure that your team is coming to you, good or bad, right? They're trusting you enough to know that sometimes the response may not necessarily be ideal, but they trust you enough that, hey, they listened, they understood, and now we can figure out a path forward. And so just because they share doesn't mean you have to do anything, right? Doesn't call you to go into action, right? Sometimes listening goes a long way. Now, the third thing is agility. And I like to think of agility as adaptability and resiliency together. How well is your team handling change? And you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with trust? Well, if your team doesn't adapt to change and doesn't have a lot of bounce back, this can run into an issue of, do they trust you to lead them as things are shifting and changing and pivoting? Now, the landscape of business is always changing. I like to believe, or I like to say, that organizations are organisms, which means they're changing all the time. And so how you articulate the change back to transparency and accountability, the what, the why, and the how, determines their level of adaptability and resiliency. And so I found with teams that are high performing and highly productive, they are very adaptable and they're also resilient because they trust their leaders. And so the sooner, you can get somebody adaptable if you have to make a pivot, and they show that they can bounce back from what it is they're doing or working on, or from even a failure, it shows how much they trust you and trust the team to get back on track and get it done. I hope that this was helpful. I'll also be covering some common mistakes that leaders make as they are building trust within the team. I'll link it up right here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this. Give a comment below. What's one thing that you would like to work on as a leader? I cannot wait to continue this leadership journey with you. See you soon.